mimetic design in the prehistorical period, and more specifically in the Neolithic period. You know, the Neolithic period is the period in which men began to use permanent housing to create something we call towns, but we are not quite sure. Because it seems that the idea of the town is there, which is putting people together in permanent houses. But what makes the town possible, such as streets, or squares, or central administration, as far as we know, is missing. You know, in 1959, they discovered in Turkey, first, this is the road of the, you know, in the prehistorical world, civilization is moving from the east, from the Baghdad area, more or less, to the west. And for a long time, they didn't realize that there were lots of Neolithic establishments in Turkey. The one which was well known because of the Bible in part is Jericho, which is a pretty big one. But in 1959, James Mellart, who was a professor at Cambridge, discovered one of the biggest and most fascinating for its art, in particular, Neolithic settlements, and it's Çatalhöyük there, which is in the south-central Anatolia, a very hot area in the summer. I've never been there, but it was discovered by this professor at Cambridge in 1958-59, and it was discovered fairly easily anyway because Neolithic settlements were always at the same spot. The houses were always rebuilt on the ruins of the preceding houses. And Çatalhöyük, according to the readings, you know, carbon readings and all that, existed from about 9,500 BC, 1,400 years, which brings it not very far in prehistorical terms, but very far in terms of the civilizations we know about. And these houses were really built in mud, you know, in some kind of clay mud, which was pretty strong. Nevertheless, didn't last very. They were rebuilt about every 60 or 70 years. But many of the decorations which were inside were kept, I don't think we really know how, and repainted it, you know. So anyway, there are 18 levels of occupation in Çatalhöyük. And people think that at one time there were up to 8,000 people there. But since then, they've discovered an even larger settlement. I don't remember its name, but it doesn't matter. And they also know that Çatalhöyük is not the oldest establishment of this area. You know, for a long time they felt that maybe Neolithic civilization moved from east to west through the sea, in part. It's only fairly recently that they discovered the Turkish settlements. And James Mellart, the first discoverer, was a very flamboyant man, and he was aware of the need for publicity. So he cut through the whole thing very fast in order to find spectacular things. And he did, even more than he expected, because there are paintings which I'm going to use in Çatalhöyük, which are different and more sophisticated than anywhere else. They are not sophisticated really in the same sense as Paleolithic, the Paleolithic caves, you know, of central France and northern Spain, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, and so forth. But the art is different. The art is more natural, in a way, more spontaneous, even though it has ritual features. What I think people don't understand about Paleolithic art, you know, this magnificent profile of the animals of the time, which are just so perfect. They seem to be absolute realism. What people don't realize is if you shift from Lascaux to Chauvet, which really means something like 20,000 years later, they are exactly the same. They haven't changed a bit. I think the specialists have not insisted enough on this aspect, which is very important, and which shows that we are dealing with religious art. But the pictures I'm going to show you are reasonably realistic. They are good, quote unquote. They are not very good compared to Paleolithic art, but they are good compared to normal primitive art in terms of modern realism, true to life. The animals in particular are more realistic. If you go to Château-Bouilloux in the summer, which is about the same temperature as here, much of the summer, but there is much less air conditioning because it's 100 miles south of Konya, you know, which is a fairly modern city and which is growing very fast. But at Château-Bouilloux itself, the few houses there are were set up by the people who did the excavation. After a few years, Girard got in trouble with the Turkish government. They accused him of stealing stuff, bringing it to England, all sorts of things, and finally he was expelled from Turkey. So there was the most important settlement, Neolithic settlement in the world, you know, with these enormous possibilities when he put them. And there were no excavations from, I think, 1965 to 1993. And in 1993, the man who took over is Dr. Ian Hodder, who is the chairman of cultural anthropology at Stanford. So he had a good idea. He wanted to revive, you know, the oldest among us probably remember all the publicity around Château-Bouilloux that there was in a long time. It was very much in the news. I mean, Girard was a genius for publicity. But it's totally disappeared now. And they've been excavating again according to more up-to-date methods, scientific method. But these 18 levels of occupation are both an incredible blessing for archaeologists and the worst curse possible, because they are getting mixed up all the time to keep them separate. Sometimes it's an impossible job. And if you have to sift the dust, you know, and this is what the current people have been doing. And of course the Turkish government has been getting more and more mad because it wanted spectacular things to show the world. And you know, the area is an area which is fairly fundamentalist. And curiously, the Neolithic period and Turkish history are getting mixed up, with few people seemingly thinking about the fact that thousands of years separate the two. So I never was in Château-Bouilloux, and what I'm going to do with you is entirely borrowed from the illustrations in a book by Ian Hodder himself. The title is The Leopard's Tale, and it's a book which was published in 2006, which has many pictures of scenes which I'm going to show to you. And some of them are not the original. If I showed only the original, they would be too damaged for you to see very easily. But Mrs. Nematic, who was a Turkish woman and the daughter, I think, of a Turkish diplomat, made drawings, you know, for the sole purpose of making these pictures extremely intelligible, eliminating the dirt, the irregularity in the surface, and so forth, but trying to keep only the intention, what is visible in the intention of the author of these pictures. So, could you show you the next two? Well, okay, so this is a reconstitution, of course, of Çatalhöyük before it was covered by dirt. And it's in the spring where there are big floods. As a matter of fact, there are such floods now, or so much water that people wonder how these things could resist all that water. You know, there are many mysteries, of course, which are probably very easy to solve, but which are not immediately soluble. Well, they were not soluble in water, they were fortunate. And there's something wrong about that picture because it makes it more like a modern village. You have a feeling there are streets or something. It was totally compact. So, in a way, more than a modern town, it should be compared to a beehive or something of the sort. You know. Not that the walls were really common to two houses, they were separate. But there was very little space in between, and fortunately for the archaeologists, it was used for garbage. So it's full of garbage. And archaeology is a magnificent profession. The only problem is that if you're an archaeologist, you spend your life in garbage from the beginning. That's about the main instrument of knowledge. So, now, the next picture. So this is one of the pictures drawn by Mrs. Mellard. And it's one of the important pictures. What I'm going to show you, this is the now extinct, but I understand we saw in a dictionary that the auroch, you know, which is a wild European boar, which was hunted widely and disappeared, probably became extinct through excessive hunting. Today, of course, the fashion is to say that everything in nature became extinct through excessive hunting and because of man. It's a fashion right now for obvious reasons. We are destroying so many things that we think it's always been that way now. Whereas before we never thought that a species could become extinct because of man. But now we see this of the great much more diverse fauna that existed in the Paleolithic period, at the period of Lascaux and all these things. But you understand there is a great difference between cave painting, which is never visible from outside, which may have been reserved to initiates, to things like the paintings I'm going to show you, which are usually found in what we call private houses. Are they really private? Are they religious? They had no temples, no churches. So in a way, every house was a shrine, was a kind of temple. And in some of them, there were paintings like this. And the geography of the house was very important. The north wall was the sacred wall, usually on which you find this sort of thing. But there are exceptions. You see? Then, under the bench of the north wall, many people were buried. But probably not as many as lived in these houses. But it was a custom, and it's still a custom, to, in some archaic tribes, not anymore, but I mean, anthropologists of the last century have seen it of burying people in the house itself. So people actually sat on a bench under which they had the bodies of their ancestors. This is interesting to know in order to make you feel the difference in mentality. So, the next picture, please. So you see, I wanted to show you, after the drawing of Mrs. Miller, a snapshot of the original picture, which has color, of course. And but if you really look very carefully, you will see that it's exactly the same thing she drew. But of course, the picture she drew is really to the right of the animal. Here it's not what is true in Paleolithic, in Paleolithic painting. It's just so magnificent, the profile of the animal, that some people think it was done, through outlines of the wall that were left with the animal being present. But I don't think it's possible because the animal is alive. And when it's a tiger, it's very difficult to obtain from the tiger that he would hold the pose. So, but the men in Paleolithic are practically non-existent, so there's no interest in them at all. And there is something very similar, and which is so typical of religion. This is the time when animals were domesticated for the first time. So we know that these people ate a great quantity of meat, and it was domesticated sheep and domesticated goats. And probably these were held, around the town, but very close to it. But we don't know for sure, because the bones are not there. The bones are in the refuse. The animals were eaten by the people in their daily meals, you see. So we don't really know. But we also know that there was quite a bit of hunting. And the hunting, I call it hunting, but I'm the first one to call it hunting. And this is what's new, really, about the interpretation I'm going to give you, because it's usually labeled, and by Ian Hodder in particular, who's been spending quite a few years there, He has such personal problems and leads such a life that his life is infernal. Nevertheless, he knows much more than I do. I have been looking at his pictures for 2 years, and one constantly discovers something more about them. But would you shift to the next picture? This is another one of the same type, but the original picture is not in Ian Harder's book, and this, of course, is the reproduction by Mrs. Mellard, who was a very good drawer. And you can be pretty sure that the original image is the same. I don't know if it is in the British Museum or where it is right now, or in Turkey, but I think we can trust it quite well. And you can see in a way that it's the same thing as the other. It's literally a human mob around an animal. We can see the pattern I'm talking about. This one is a more or less circular, semicircular pattern with literally a mob, because there is something disorganized about these people. They are not, they have problems with their only garment, which is that spotted, which may be a leopard skin. It may be a leopard skin and it may not be. There was leopards. I think there are even still some leopards in the forest mountains today. But there were at the time. But Ian Hodder spent a lot of time looking for bones, remnants of leopards, which are represented in other pictures, which are not like the one I'm showing, without men. I will show you at the end. Sometimes they are represented motionless and face to face in complete balance. This could be described as a picture of imbalance, total turmoil, and can be opposed, and that's what he does in his book in a way, to the two leopards facing each other, who are really more violent animals, but are in perfect balance, and are an image of equilibrium, which is not there because it's a process which is taking place. And here you can understand immediately why the idea of Ian Hodder defines that picture as the teasing and baiting of a stag. By the way, the animals are always male. And we have to say everything. There is a sexual teasing of the animal. The animal always, their penis is erect. They've lost their balance. They are obviously, the sexual organs are purposely aimed at by the crowd, and it's one of the fascinating aspects. There is someone reaching for the front legs of the animal, but we don't know what he's doing, of course. There are people in front pulling the tongue of the animal. Some of them seem to have heavy objects, that they may aim at the animal. The next picture, please. This is so close that you might think it's the same thing, But if you really look at the animal, he looks very different. His attributes are in the same condition. The people are fighting him, moving towards him, baiting, teasing him. I should say, but I feel he's very much like a god or a human being. It's difficult to see it. And there is a second picture down there with a boar, which is of the same type. But you feel, if you look at it carefully, you feel that the teasing and baiting has a tendency to shift. It's there with the boar. And the hackles, you see, are very visible, which is a sign of irritation in the animal. And the fact that they painted that shows the concern for realism, which is really fascinating. And obviously the people around, it's a smaller group, but they are mocking the animal. In Nematic terms, we use the word scapegoat. And of course, in Nematic theory, archaic scapegoating plays a great role because we think it's the origin of religion. None of the people, the archaeologists who are considering these pictures are thinking about that. But I think it's an enormous discovery from the point of view of the Nematic theory to have evidence for animal. It would be even preferable if it were human, preferable. But to have animal scapegoating is the most amazing thing. If you go to these pictures without knowing anything about the Nematic theory, they make very little sense what's going on. And but if we know the Nematic theory, but here we have two groups, or we don't really know if the painter wanted to paint what he wanted to do. We would prefer the two to be more separated, but they are a little bit mixed together. Anyway, you will notice another thing which is quite interesting and important, not too much, that quite a few of members of the crowd are visibly damaged. You see, for instance, to the lower left, the one which has a missing leg. Then under there is some kind of something which is not even recognizably human, which should be there because it cannot be a living individual. But there is a lot of that in these pictures. and someone is kicking the animal in the leg, there is one pulling the leg, there is one behind, and the penis of the animal is erect too. The animals are never females, they are always males, which is an object of contention, of course, or should be or will be in the future when these pictures are seriously examined from point of view of their significance, because there have been people who made an argument that Çatalhöyük was probably an example of female religion, because of the picture that I will show you with a statue at the end, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to interrupt my reason. But these three men at the lower part there seem to be contaminated with the mood of the thing, and do the same type of teasing and baiting on one of them, or two of them, as they do with the animal, which is an amazing thing. Is it some form of drunkenness we're taking over, or some kind of sexual orgy or something, which is quite big. So the question is, what does it mean? I should really look at my pictures. I don't want to forget. So the second picture is very much like the first. Could you go back to the thing? If you look at the animal, it's really very different. The horns are completely different. So look again at that picture very carefully with the man reaching for the front legs. We don't know what he does, you know. But we can see that some of these people, most of these people are not really armed, but the one who is pulling the tail of the animal has some kind of a sheath there that could be for holding a dagger. And I think it is what it is. The only efficient weapon that these people had were obsidian knives, short blades, very sharp, but very short. Therefore, they made it impossible to kill an animal of this size from any distance. And that is the reason, I think, that this type of, I call it hunting fighting, because, go to the next picture. If you look, Ian Harder pays no attention to the fact, he considers it a teasing and baiting. But the man in the preceding picture who was reaching for the front leg of the animals had some very important intention. What he wanted to do, obviously, is what is done here, which is a cutting off of the ankles. Probably with an obsidian knife. You could do that. They were probably extremely skillful with these things. And if the animal was deterred by the sexual teasing and baiting, the animal could kick off the men at their feet, trying to cut off their feet. But there would come a moment when one man, such as we have in the first picture, if we look only at the first picture, we cannot know what he's doing or trying to do. He seems to be, it's in a different part of the picture. But if we go back to the second, we can see this. I'm not saying that these pictures are in a sequence, that they are like a bunch of things, but what I'm saying, and I'm certain of, is that the technique, and it's a technique of killing the animal, not of teasing maybe. The technique was highly ritualized. Therefore, you can rely, the previous picture represents an earlier moment in the hunting of the animal. In this part here, the hunting is over. The animal should already have fallen on its front legs, and there becomes totally vulnerable to the mob. The mob is never represented killing the animal, and it's probably one of the most daring things I say by supplying it. But the mob, obviously, when the animal is down, is going to rush on the animal. Therefore, we are attending here in mobbing of an animal. I'm sure that the mobbing of men is very important in the history of religion. But what I didn't suspect is that the mobbing of animal is the first form of sacrifice, in a way, of ritual sacrifice. But the ritual sacrifice is a ritual sacrifice and it's everything else at the same time, because these animals were eaten in big festivals. How can I go? We know that there were big festivals, which was the only occasion when wild venison was eaten. The rest of the time, they were eating sheep and goats. So they have found the results, the remains of these, and they think that when not enough animals were killed for these festivals, which maybe took place at precise moments, we don't know about that. We don't know enough. See, if there were not enough venison, they added domesticated animals. But the main thing was to eat. Therefore, it was a look toward the past. It was a passion of the past. Like, in a way, always necessarily religion is. It's looking back. We don't know if we can say the Paleolithic. And the distinction between the Paleolithic, we know that the caves of Lascaux, Altamira, and all that, that's a Paleolithic. But some of them are 50,000 years BC. Some of them are, I think that Lascaux is 32. So it's a great area. Times become shorter as one gets closer to the present. More things happen, or at least we believe that. But it may look back. You see, these big festivals, they may go back to the Paleolithic, since the domestic animals were, in theory, excluded from them. When we think in modern terms, this is Neolithic, they invented domestication of animals, they grew the first cereals, and we expect to see fields with little sheep and goats frolicking, in the grass and so forth. No, the wild animals were more important. The problem that the domesticated animals solved, undoubtedly, is not mentioned anywhere or visible anywhere in the culture. Nevertheless, today we can be sure, when you look at the refuse, which is the evidence par excellence in that period, we know that the meat of domesticated animals dominates. In the iconography, in all the images we have of the place, sculpture and so forth, we don't have one domesticated animal. The domesticated animal may be without hardly realizing it. And it solved a big problem, no doubt. But anyway, the imagination looked towards the wild. And that way. In order to understand that teasing and baiting cannot be a definition, that it's really hunting. It's really killing the animal. It's really a technique of hunting that we have here. And we could say that the first thing to consider is the economic or the technological aspect. So you have to have physical contact with them, having only very short weapons. And therefore you had to bring them down. And I think this was the normal technique of killing the animal. But it shouldn't be regarded primarily as an economic occupation, because the festival after that, these were eaten in festivals that are visible in the refuse and so forth, therefore, were probably very important, even if they didn't include the whole pack. We know that in these maps, not all people are included. If you look at the previous picture, another proof that this is not a sequence is that in the previous picture, people wear a beard. All people wear a beard. And in the next images again, some of them do, but most of them do not. Well, anyway, there are differences. So, if they can be read in sequence, it's because the gestures were so ritualized that from any moment of the hunt that you have, you can know what the next moment is going to be. And the part we don't have, of course, is what I think is the climax, but it's beyond the climax too, when the animal is fallen and that the mob rushes for the kill. So there were these festivals, but we had another proof that the animals were killed, at least one. That it's not a joke, in other words. Ian Hodder seems to treat it as a joke, or not to see the importance of the legs cut off. And probably the people of Chatham, when they saw the first picture, they all knew very well what the man reaching for the front legs was doing, even though it's not visible in that picture, because they knew everything about the ritual technique. But I say, first of all, it's a technique of the hunt. But now look at the horns of the animal. The horns of the animal are represented the first time on the head of the animal where they belong, and a second time, you see, and it's true on both pictures. On the first picture, it's represented with more care, but it's obviously the horns. Therefore, if it were a cartoon, modern cartoon, we know immediately, people before writing, and people who want to get rid of writing, behave in the same fashion, and they express meaning in the same way. The second pair of horns means that after the death of the animal, which is certain, the horns will be transported somewhere else. They are being carried away. And of course, the archaeologists, even with 5% on the Chatham, know very well where these horns were. They were in, maybe you show the next picture. Yeah. See, this is one of the benches under which the ancestors were buried. And this is the north wall, which was a sacred wall. And these are the horns of the animals which were hunted in the pictures we saw before. Therefore, there is a sacred purpose. And the mystery of the sacred there is just as great as the mystery of archaic sacred in religions that were studied by anthropologists. How can you shift from the image of the animal as an enemy that you persecute, that you treat badly because you're really mad at him? He doesn't want to let himself be caught, as he should, and he resists all he can. How can you shift to a picture where these horns are protected, since they are inside the house? And they stayed inside the house in lots of generations because they were repainted and reused when a new house was built on top of the preceding one. Very often they are in much worse shape because the horns disappears and it's only the core of the horn which is there, so much less spectacular too. But I think there is a picture of reconstitution. No, but there's one before. Did you miss one?
This one?
No. I'm looking
No.
for one which is a modern reconstitution.
No.
Of the house, the inside of the house. It's not there. Well, anyway, if you look inside the house, you know the north wall, there were all these protruding horns which were huge and scary, and tend to make you believe that it was a very, what should I say, warlike, scary religion, but not at all. Once the animal was dead, its significance changed completely. It became protective. That's why it was put inside the houses. It became really divine, quote unquote, in the sense that it had there. And I think the reason is the Nematic Reason, is that scapegoating united the mob against the animal. And if you look at the members of the mob, they are wounded. And the idea, I think, that the image wants to convey is that they are wounded by the animal. Who is responsible? But I don't think it's possible. Many of them, you see, like this is very obvious, but there are arms and even heads neatly curved, therefore there is a purpose there. And the purpose, I think, is to show that the animal is vanquished with great difficulty until, and finally, peace comes back because of the animal. But I really think we are dealing, no animal such as a stag could inflict that type of wound on a human being, cut off an arm. You've never seen a stag bite off the arm of the hunter. Therefore, there is something mythical about the picture of the wounds. And there are people who have no heads who continue the hunting. So, in reality, you can assume that there was internal trouble in the societies and that there was a violence which, in a way, gave way in the hunt back to the unity of the group, which is the reason, I think, the basic reason religion is never purposeless or senseless as the modern world believes. But the animal embodied a shift from the violence of the community to the restored peace, to the unity of the group. Therefore was really divine, was what we call an idol. Yeah.
René, could I just ask you, what do you think that figure bottom center is carrying? It looks like penises.
It might be.
I mean, so castration.
Maybe castration.
This is a material contribution to the peace of the community.
That's true. Well, I think there's suggestion that, I think it's very good, really, but of course it's a tentative. But when there are too many possibilities like this, they tend to become more credible. And, well, in order to understand really all the aspects, we could compare. We have to think of the Spanish bullfight. What is the Spanish bullfight? It could be defined in a way as the teasing and baiting of a bull. Because all the first part of the bullfight, which is the longest, the planting the banderillas in the shoulders of the bull, the play with the muleta and so forth, are not deadly for the bull, but they get him tired, exhausted. They get it in such a state that it will be possible for the torero, for the matador, to kill the animal in the appropriate fashion, in the ritual fashion, which is facing the horns of the animal a few inches away and planting his sword to the heart of the animal in one just single gesture, which is the climax of the bull. But if you define a bullfight as the teasing and baiting of a bull, this is not enough. you have to define it as the killing of the bull. But this killing is complex. And if you look at the incredible genius of a certain Goya, which is not too often reproduced, his bullfights with huge crowds being part of the bullfight, you will see that they are closer to Neolithic art in some ways than anything you would think of. And it makes a lot of sense out of that. Therefore, I think we are dealing with a form of religion which is very difficult to situate, because we have that second image, the image of the lepers. Yeah. See, which is an image of balance. He and Haber became interested in his leper. They all touch, but they don't fight, and they are in complete balance. So they can be opposed to the other picture, which is pure motion, destruction, and growth. But I think they may represent an older religion, which is still in existence to a certain extent, is in conflict with the newer ones, which involves the animal in our first pictures. But this is only a vague hint. Anyway, what interests me enormously, of course, is to find there completely intelligible, represented without writing, a scheme which is the one which is least believed when you speak about the Nematic theory. When you say religion must originate in scapegoat phenomena which are divine. I think the only possible definition of the pictures before there is this one, and that it corrects the aspects of the reading of this book which are not quite right, because the author doesn't know the Nematic theory. And I think it's a very important discovery really for the future of the Nematic theory and for the scientific backing that we need to make the Nematic theory more plausible and understandable. Because I think it's the only possibility in which these pictures can and should be read. Thank you very much.